Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Inside Out 2 completely demolish the competition and really set a standard for the summer of 2024, opening to $155 million in its domestic opening, close to $300 million in its worldwide opening. To say that these numbers are impressive is a bit of an understatement, because this film going into the weekend was being projected with a range of 85 million to a top end of 115. So to come in at 155 completely destroys every single metric out there, every single projection out there, and shows you that, hey, if you give families especially, a movie that does not have politics in it, that is not being an agenda-driven formula that Disney has been trying to push now for many, many years, guess what? You actually will have people show up for your movie. Add to that, I think, effective marketing, things like that, and you can see that there is still a lot of life to be had for Disney, for Pixar. But does this mean that Disney's back? Does this mean that the box office is back? Obviously, you all know that every other film to come out this year has not been showing the same type of life as this one. I think that this will probably be one of those exceptions that we'll have for this year, right? So this film will do very well. I think that Deadpool Wolverine will be the next film that does really, really well. And a lot of the other films are probably going to fall somewhere in between, if I had to guess. But let's just, again, get the headline out there up front. This movie is coming in at such a high number where there are some projecting that the domestic take on this film, the end domestic take on this film, could be close to $500 million. And if that actually happens, if this film does leg out in any serious way, not only domestically but internationally, the chance of $1 billion hit is out there. There is a chance for that to happen. Now, still a little too early to tell at this point in time, but as you all know, after your opening weekend, if you have an average run, a typical run at the box office, you usually get about 30% or about a third of your entire box office in your global opening. If that actually were to hold for this movie, guess what? A third of $300 million, or rather, $300 being a third of what? $900 million? You can see why $1 billion is absolutely on the table for this movie, and we, of course, will continue to follow this on OMB Reviews, especially with the second weekend numbers, because if this film has a strong hold, right now all indications based off of early reviews, based off of the general sentiments surrounding this movie, indicate that it will hold very strong, that it will do very well down the line. It will continue to open in other international markets that it has not yet opened in, also that this movie, again, has a very good chance of getting to $1 billion. Now, we have some other updates to some other franchise players as well, including an update to the Bad Boys franchise, and we'll give some projections there, looking very good, in fact, for that movie, for that franchise, looking like that film is going to be able to break even and make some profits. We'll give you the real numbers on that movie, and a plethora of other things. But before we go any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So Tony at Deadline, of course, is going to take this very, very, very good news and use his typical ignorance of inflation and other things like that to make a claim like, it's the second best opening ever for an animated film. It's like, look, don't take away the fact that this is an amazing opening. All right, because this is. It's not just an amazing opening for a film in 2024, it's an amazing opening for an Inside Out movie. This film actually has now officially made more than what the first film made opening weekend domestic, even when you adjust for inflation, and more importantly, when you compare average ticket prices, this film sold more tickets in its opening weekend. That is a very important metric. Remember that we've been tracking this now for a long time, for at least a couple years. And we've been comparing ticket sales in franchises. We've been comparing ticket sales, especially for films coming out in the post-COVID era, to films from the prior to COVID era. And what we've always found, universally found, is that none of the films were able to really match up, right? None of the newer films were able to match up to the older ones. This is the only time that at least I can remember, since I've been charting these things, the only time that I can remember a film doing actually better than its opening, with the opening being back for this film and this franchise back in 2015 when the first one came out. So, Tony, you don't need to run with the second best ever, because when you adjust for inflation, that number clearly changes. But the fact still remains, this is very, very good, not only for a film in 2024, but also for the Inside Out franchise, which only has 2 films to its name. After this, I suspect that you'll probably have Bob Iger on the phone with several different people saying, we've got to make 1,000 of these now, and it'll probably get ruined. But hey, let's go ahead and take the good news in stride, because this is very, very good news. Even Nance, good old Nance over at Deadline, also is saying how it is joy to the world. Inside Out 2 has thrilled with historic $295 million global opening. And again, it is very, very good, but whenever they are bringing history into this, whenever they're trying to bring in these different metrics, right, usually they are based on very faulty math, very faulty equations, and so I think that ultimately, I think their headlines are a bunch of hogwash. We'll get into some real numbers and data, though, here on our channel, because that's what we like to do here. We love charts, we love numbers, we love giving you the raw facts, the raw data, instead of the nonsense that mainstream media will often try to give you. Let's go to thenumbers.com, though, and see this number for ourselves. So $155 million domestic. That means that in the 4,400 screens that it is now in, $34,000 per screen. Oh boy, we haven't seen a number like that in quite a while, right? $34,000 per screen. That means that these screens, right, the theaters that this film is being attended by, are very well attended. We can imagine that most of these are probably coming in from the Saturday, Sunday crowd, especially those morning crowds. We probably have a lot of families with a lot of kids going to see this film. This is also very, very good for movie theaters. Always remember that it's not just about whether the studio is making money or not. It's about whether the theaters are making money, because you need the theaters to be happy, you need the theaters to make money so they can stay open, so that you can continue to have films like this be able to actually make this kind of money. So hopefully now Disney is reminded once again about how much they actually do need the theaters, and they need to actually start making good content again, akin to Inside Out 2, in this case, as obviously is being made clear by not only the money, but also the reactions and the reviews from audiences more so than anyone else, because we know critics these days really can't be trusted much for anything. But $155 million domestic opening is insane. Number 2 spot went to Bad Boys Ride or Die, dropping only 42% in its second weekend. The initial projections were around 50%, so this is even better. So clearly this film holding very, very strong. Right now I can project the film will make money. We'll talk about how much money in just a little bit. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes coming in the number 3 spot with 5.2 million, dropping only 4%. And that's actually more impressive than people may realize, because it was dropped from over 500 screens and yet only dropped 4%. So it's very impressive when you are taking it away from those many different eyes and those many different markets, and are still able to actually hold to such a degree where theoretically you may have even had an increase had you kept it in some of those markets. And again, can't ever predict that. Obviously, those markets were chosen for a reason. They were probably the screens in the theaters that were not being well attended. But either way, 4% drop when you are pulling from theaters is very, very good. However, as I've mentioned from previous videos, film's still not really on pace to be much of a moneymaker. In fact, probably ends up as a net loss. But as I've also mentioned too, 20th Century Studios, Disney, the distributor on the movie, will probably walk away with money on this one simply by being the distributor and not the primary financier of the film. So whether or not people are making money off of the film, don't know nearly as much about that. As an individual film, I can say it's not making nearly as much as it needs to hit that number. We'll look at the updated chart there on that film. Also, Garfield film dropping 50%, so still holding on very strong, so still doing very well with $5 million there. And then the other film, see its second weekend, is The Watchers. The Watchers coming in 48% drop, so not a terrible drop percentage-wise from week 1 to week 2, but because it did have such a low opening, and because this movie was made for a little bit more than what it probably should have been made for, at least based off of the estimates of the budget for the film probably will end up being a net loss for Warner Brothers, though they might be able to make that up in the long run through PVOD sales, things like that. So The Watchers rounding out the top 5 there. Some other notable things is IF still hanging around as well. Furiosa still dropping off over 1,000 screens, so Warner Brothers has clearly abandoned this film. Remember, this movie is going to be well over now $150 million in losses for Warner Brothers. The Fall Guy dropping 42%. Strangers Chapter 1 in week 5 dropping 58%. And then rounding out the top 10 is actually Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. So shout out to them for being able to keep the film in theaters. Unfortunately, I was trying to go see this film during the week, but they had no showtimes near me. And I even checked the updated weekend numbers and did not see anyone near me either. So I sadly was not able to see this movie. But the fact that the film has been out for as long as it has and is still in the top 10 these many years later, 20 years later, oh boy, still tells you about the current state of cinema, right? So even though Inside Out 2 is clearly showing, even Bad Boys Ride or Die is clearly showing that there is definitely a market for movie-going. There are people who want to go see these movies. It is still something for us to, I think, look at and consider and take in when a film from 20 years ago is getting into your top 10. And that's not even talking about the daily numbers, because during the week, there were times when it was actually creeping into the top 5, top 3 positions. So yeah, definitely good on them for being able to continue that franchise going forward. Now let's go into the actual numbers for Inside Out 2. I'm sure that's why a lot of y'all are here today. So 155 domestic, $140 million internationally. And one thing that many of these articles have noted is that that's only in around 35 or so markets. And for those that maybe don't know, that means the film has not yet released in about 30 or so other markets that could account for a certain amount of money that could actually end up making this film, again, have that chance, even higher chance of getting to $1 billion. So the fact that we're seeing these numbers with the amount of markets that it's actually in internationally tells us that there is enough hunger already for the film to have a chance, a pretty good chance at $1 billion. And so the fact that we have these other markets that have not even been accounted for yet means that that chance of $1 billion becomes that much higher. So if the domestic numbers are able to hold, and that's going to be a key question, a key thing, right? Is this just the opening weekend? Is this just all the pre-sales? Are we going to see a massive drop-off akin to a Marvel film like we've seen in the past? Or are we going to see what we typically find from many Pixar films, and not just in Pixar films, but animated films in general, where they typically hold very, very well. They typically hold very strong because you have a lot of people, a lot of families still going to see those showings on the Saturday and Sunday mornings when they actually have the time to go, right? With especially parents that maybe work throughout the summer, throughout the year. And so I think we'll probably see something very similar for Inside Out too. But it's good to know, and I'm glad to hear from people that I trust, that the film seemingly is a very good one, right? That it is actually not as good as the first one, but still pretty good, pretty entertaining. And the most important factor, it's not trying to preach a message that you are going to be afraid to bring your child to. And that's something that I think has been a fear in the back of many people's minds. Clearly, the marketing for this film was effective enough to give enough confidence in families to go out to see this movie again. So much that when you compare this film back to even the 2015 film, look at how much higher. And this is with adjusted for inflation numbers, by the way. Look at how much higher Inside Out 2 is doing versus Inside Out 1. $62 million first Friday. That concludes that first Thursday premiere numbers versus $43 million. $51 million first Saturday versus $39. $42 million first Sunday versus $32 million for the first film. $155 versus $115 million when you adjust for inflation. It gets even more interesting when you take into account ticket sales. So this is something that I talked about going into the weekend, that even if it got to that high end, right? The initial projections on the movie were $115 million for the high end. So even if it got to that point, it had still would only have gotten to the point it would have been less opening weekend, I should say, domestic ticket sales. Because now it has far exceeded that number at $155 million, not only is it vastly higher than even the adjusted numbers for inflation, it's also higher ticket sale-wise. So 10.7 million tickets were roughly sold for the first film back in 2015. That's the domestic opening. So that's United States, Canada, opening weekend ticket sales just for those first few days. 10.7 million tickets. This movie, 11.9 million tickets. So not only did it do better than that film, it did significantly better, right? It did almost 2 million tickets better than what the other film did. And remember that this is coming from a chart where every time we go back, whether it's Bad Boys, right, coming in millions of tickets less and underneath where the other films in the franchise were. Mad Max obviously coming in far below Fury Road. Planet of the Apes coming in below even that of the 2017 film. Godzilla, right? That film, obviously we looked at these ticket sales and think to ourselves, of course, that there were some pretty bad movies along the way. But again, even then, we saw not reaching the same heights of even the 2014 film. The Ghostbusters franchise going all the way back, even Ghostbusters 2016, we saw a decrease in tickets. Kung Fu Panda, right, was able to hold from Kung Fu Panda 3 to Kung Fu Panda 4, so it was able to have somewhat of a hold there. But in general, we've seen just declines. We've seen decreases in almost every single franchise, right? Hunger Games, Battle of Songbirds and Snakes, we saw a massive decline from the last film in the main franchise. And so the fact that Inside Out is doing something that very few films have really been able to do at such a level as other films have not been able to do is, to say the least, very impressive. So kudos to them for being able to actually do this. And as you can see, the numbers don't lie. And the numbers are very clear that Inside Out 2 doing better than Inside Out 1. Now, does it hold? Is it going to be able to? Again, the first film, when you adjust for inflation, actually does get to $1 billion. Right, the actual numbers for that film were around $850 million. If this film already is tracking this far ahead of where Inside Out 1 was at the same point of release, we can imagine that, okay, when you adjust for inflation, the fact that it's still tracking ahead of those inflated numbers by a certain percentage point, and those inflated numbers also indicate $1 billion success for the 2015 movie, guess what? $1 billion is absolutely on the table for this film. There's just no doubt about it at this point. Bad Boys Ride or Die has risen to $214 million worldwide. Very, very good numbers there for this film, especially domestically. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, $374 million. Again, people might say, worldwide, that seems pretty good. But remember, this film cost enough money to where It still has a ways to go, especially with most of its money coming from the international markets. Garfield film has been able to make profit, adding on to the profits at this point in time. And then The Watchers, as I said, based off of the estimated budget for the film, let's go ahead and see. Actually, we'll do this live and in real time to see exactly if we have any updates to this. Typically, they have budgets listed here. I do not see one, so we're still going based off of an estimated budget for that film. But we do have those 2-week numbers for both Bad Boys and also for The Watchers. And so if we look to the chart, because we love charts here, on OMB Reviews, we're going to use my RCC chart. So this means that I'm taking into account domestic take, international take, the China take, right? If you have a release in that communist country, and what the actual take, net loss, net gain will actually be for a film. So making some projections for, first, The Watchers, with a second weekend number of about $18 million. I'm projecting that film to get somewhere between $26 million and $36 million in total box office, which means around a $29 to $23 million financial loss. Now remember, the budget for this movie is being presented as $30 million. This is an estimated budget because we don't have anything officially being reported at this point in time. So if that number is actually less, maybe the film has a chance at breaking even. Based on the numbers that we're seeing right now, it's just not bringing enough people out to the theater to justify its own financial existence. And that ultimately means a financial flop. So we'll, of course, continue to follow those numbers, but as of right now, it's not looking good. In the real-time numbers, that means it's around a $37 million loss at this point in time. Very different story going on for Bad Boys Ride or Die. At $214 million now, after 2 weeks, I'm projecting the film, based off of the usual historical standards, that it'll get somewhere between $306 and $429 million worldwide by the end of its run. Because the film only costs around $100 million to make, this has actually been reported as such, and so a little bit more confidence in these numbers here. I can project that based off a typical 2.5 multiplier, the film has a projected chance to get somewhere between $33 million and $107 million in net gain profits. Now, the big thing, of course, with this movie, though, is the fact that the film, to my knowledge, let me go ahead and see if I can actually update this in real time to give us a better understanding. This film will get a China release. So next weekend, it will get a release in China. So that will definitely cut into any money it makes there. Not that I expect it to make a lot of money there, but again, any money coming from the box office is going to have to be considered there. But because of where it is currently making its money, around $87 million domestic, around $48 million according to the... Let me go ahead and actually see if I can get these numbers updated as such to make sure that these are actually reflecting the numbers as they should be. But as of the 87, let's see, $136 million. Let's do a quick check on that. $136 million, $214 million. So I need to update this. That's why I do this in real time, by the way, right? Just the way I am staying honest with you guys, okay? Because that's the most important thing, is that we are honest here. Let me go ahead and see if I can get that updated in real time. There we go. All right, much better numbers there with the updated numbers. Let's see if I can do the same thing also for that film as well. Boom, there we go. That is much better. And let me just do this double check to make sure that it is the same for The Watchers. Bam. All right. So around $35 million currently in losses right now for The Watchers, just in case that number was not correct. But as we go to Bad Boys Ride or Die, at $214 million, right now it's around $47 million still in the red. And that's why it's important to always remember, right? Domestically, films get a studio gets about 55% of the total domestic number, around 40% of the entire international number without China. China specifically, you get 25%, right? So with those numbers and those breakdowns, that's why Bad Boys has not broken even yet. So even at $214 million, even at double its budget, still has not broken even. And because it's getting a lot from international, not nearly as much as the domestic, but still a lot, by 102 versus 112, there's not much separation there. It's almost a 50-50 split. It means that the film still has a ways to go to break even. Now, based on these numbers, even taking into account the real numbers, right, my RCC method, I still suspect the film will be able to break even, make profits. Do I think it's going to get to $100 million in profits? At this point, I would say no. All right, it's got too much to make up, almost $50 million it has to make up still. And then when it does eventually make up that amount of money, because remember that $50 million is not saying it needs to make $50 million more to break even. What it means is that it needs to make the equivalent of $50 million based off of whether it's a 55% split domestically or 40% split internationally, et cetera, right? All those things added together. So it's definitely going to be able to make its money back, I think, but it's not going to be able to get to those heights. Still very impressive for the film nonetheless, not doing as well, I believe, on paper versus the last film to come out prior to COVID, right at the very beginning of COVID. Again, we'll do this also live and in real time. Let's compare this thing to Bad Boys for Life. So looking at the actual numbers there, you can see $112 versus $120 million when you adjust for inflation. I suspect that that number will be obviously that much better, right? 112 versus 141. So it's still tracking behind the total ticket sales, the total amount made by the film from 2020 and Bad Boys for Life. So again, $498 million is what that film ended at when you adjust for inflation. When you take the actual numbers, the first film in this comparison is $424 million. So I think that that number probably is much more likely, getting into the upper 300s, the low 400s being a potential. And that's why I do think that, again, profit is probably coming its way as well. A film that I think is absolutely going to make profit, though, because we've talked about this already, chance of $1 billion, is Inside Out 2. So just to give you an idea of how well this film is doing, right? The break even in a typical case would be around 2.5 times the budget. This film costs $200 million to make. So Disney is still overspending. Imagine if you had this kind of release, but instead Disney only spent $100 million. Or spent, in the case of Kung Fu Panda 4, like $80 million. Think about the profit margins on that, right? So Disney has clearly been able to figure out its marketing problem, has clearly been able to find out its content problem, at least with this one specific case. And I think that we'll definitely be able to add to that eventually Deadpool versus Wolverine, or Deadpool and Wolverine, I should say. And I think that we'll see something similar there. But whatever they've done for this one and for eventually Deadpool Wolverine, that's what they need to start doing for every single movie going forward. And I think that this should hopefully show to them, yeah, guess what? When you don't get political, when you don't try to push agendas, when you don't try to put a wedge between children and their parents, guess what? You're going to get a lot of success. You're going to bring out a lot of people. There's still a lot of families out there that want to bring their kids to a theater. That's still a great experience for a lot of people. As many families as have been lost, they've been able to add that much more to this movie. Now, what I do find interesting is that Tony at Deadline has talked about this consistently, that the reason why this film especially is doing as well as it is domestically is because apparently the Hispanic population is showing up in droves to see this film. And those are walk-up numbers. These are people that are not buying their tickets prior to showing up to the actual theater, right? They're showing up probably with cash to pay for their film, to pay for their tickets, to pay for their families and their kids. An interesting dynamic there, right? Because that obviously brings into certain light some questions, but still, the fact that it's doing this well cannot take away anything from the amount of money that's being made by this. $158 million, though, is still currently where it stands in the red. I suspect that that will probably be cut in half at least by the end of next weekend, because I think that this film is going to hold very strong. The chances of this getting close to $500 million worldwide by the end of next weekend is a very strong possibility, especially if we see the kinds of holds that we typically see from animated films, and also just from more recent films. Elemental from last year, for instance, even though that film was not a huge financial success or hit, at least in the theatrical run for the film itself, we did still see strong holds down the line. Now, keep in mind that for that one of the reasons why that was the case was because it had delayed releases internationally. This looks like it's going to have very similar situations going on, meaning it's going to have delayed releases internationally in some major markets. And because that's going to happen, that's why I think the chance of $1 billion is that much higher, because not only is this film doing significantly better than Elemental, right? We're talking about an entirely different tier here in comparison to that film. In fact, let's go ahead and again do this live, because we love doing things live here on OMB Reviews. And let's put this up against the film from last year, Elemental, because it's only a year ago. Don't really even have to worry about inflationary changes all that much either, despite the fact that, of course, many of us are going to be feeling it in the long run. So the comparison between these two, all right, $155 million versus $29 million, just to give you an idea of how small Elemental's opening weekend was. $29 million versus $155. So we're talking about an entirely different game. And the fact that they spent the same amount of money on a movie in Elemental that is going to probably end up making only half, if not less, than what Inside Out 2 is going to make, tells us and shows us that, okay, this is a good case scenario. This is a best case scenario, better than best case scenario for an Inside Out 2. But this is also a sign to Disney, guess what? This is the pathway forward for you. Not that you have to continue to put out, for instance, Moana 2, right? Because that one, I don't think that film is going to do as well as Inside Out 2. And the big reason why is because that one was meant to be a series, and they decided last minute to make it into a movie. So something tells me that the reaction to that movie, that the takeaway from families for that film probably won't be as strong as it is for Inside Out 2, which is a dedicated sequel, right? An actual intended from the beginning sequel to a film that did very well and was very well reviewed by many, many people, right? Many, many fans of Inside Out and that franchise. My wife and we both enjoyed that film quite a lot. And so we actually both have interest in seeing this film now and see how it handles emotions, especially as the character of Riley gets older. But because we saw this film just last year, Elemental, bomb so horribly with the domestic market, right? It ended its domestic run around $154 million. This movie, Inside Out 2, has already made more domestically than the entire run of Elemental's domestic. Just to give you an idea. It also shows you, again, the strong holds that it had, not only domestically, but also more so internationally. And again, a big part of that is because of those delayed releases. But facts are, this movie doing very, very well. $1 billion absolutely is on the table for this movie. If it has a strong hold, if it has a better than expected hold, I think that we'll probably see that end up happening. And I'll go more into my analysis on the chances of it getting to $1 billion in my article for geekygamers.com if you want to find out more about that information. But again, these numbers, looking at the real raw data as of right now, looking great for Inside Out 2, looking pretty good for Bad Boys Ride or Die, which again, I'm saying is going to make profit. The question is how much profit because of where the splits currently are and where it's making money. Watchers, not so much based off the budget that we have in front of us. Furiosa, massive flop here. The fact that they're pulling it from so many screens means the film is going to be well north of 150 in losses. Right now, it's only at 180. Okay, so beforehand, I said maybe around 150 million. Now we're talking about maybe 160, 170 in losses for that film. So there's films that are still losing money, right? Let me go ahead and see actually if I can update Garfield's numbers here to see if this film has now finally on paper made its money back. It actually has. I don't know why it's listing that in the red because it doesn't have the negative there. So obviously something I need to look into. But this, again, is a situation and is an example of, again, there are still films that are doing very, very well in the case of Inside Out 2, right? I think this is going to be one of those anomalies. But there's also films that are still struggling, and some of them struggling quite a bit, right? IF, I think, a great example of that. That film actually just recently got, it got put onto, obviously, it got put onto video on demand, right around $80 million in losses for that film. So what we have in front of us is a situation where we have to, again, keep these things in mind. Let me go ahead and update this number too, just to make sure that this is accurate. So Kingdom Planet of the Apes is still 70 million in the red because of where it's making its money. So that's, again, showing you films doing very well, still some films not doing well. But the fact is, again, we'll walk away from this now, end this video now. Inside Out 2 doing phenomenally well. Have you seen Inside Out 2? Do you think it's worth the hype? Do you think that it is going to earn $1 billion, right? What do you think the chances of it making $1 billion? Based on these numbers, I would say it's a pretty good chance, especially with the track record. Even Elemental, as I pointed out, not the best of movies. It's a pretty mediocre film, right? It's one of those really mid-level films for Pixar. Had a terrible opening, right? Obviously was just being rejected altogether by families, but because it was one that did not have nearly as clear of a message or was not coming at a time, in the case of Lightyear, for instance, when Disney was in a very negative public light in such a clear way when it got involved in Florida politics, because it didn't have that, right, we saw some very, very strong holds for that movie. Are we going to see similar holds for this movie? Let me know your thoughts about this. And if you want further analysis on this, obviously check out my live stream every single Tuesday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, where I'll do further analysis on this because we'll get the actuals for the weekend as of Tuesday. And for all we know, this could end up being higher than 155. It could end up lower than 155. What are the chances of these numbers being completely false? Probably not, right? Usually for the adjustments, we don't see very large changes. If anything, it would be from 155 to maybe a minimum of 140, 155 to a maximum of 165, right? As far as the range of the estimates versus the actuals, because those are usually pretty good estimates by the end of it. But what are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, live the fire button, Aussie Sparkle Rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing people. Thank y'all for sticking around for this extra long, I feel extra long, box office analysis because, hey, it's been a long time since I've had numbers to talk about. And even though I obviously have a lot of problems with Disney as a company corporation, I also love talking box office numbers, and I love seeing theaters doing well. And clearly the theaters are going to be very, very happy with this because if this is doing well to the point where more people are seeing this versus the film from 2015, back in a time when theaters were in a much better situation, yeah, they're going to be very, very happy with their popcorn sales and all the other sales going on right now. I'm sure they're making tons of money. Might need to check my AMC stock after this as well. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. A blessed Sunday, a blessed Father's Day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals, and YouTube members who are at the Chosen of Valhalla level. Starting off with my Patreon supporters, Father Luca Illick, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, which is Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. To my Subscribe Star chosen members, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, and also the K-Man, check him out at xtheboundaries.co, and a shout out also to my one Chosen of Valhalla YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Thank you again for being so much of a huge supporter of the channel. And to every one of my chosen members, if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, or if you want access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, etc., and access to an exclusive podcast bonus material for members, check out the links in the video description below for all of those details. You guys are amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed month of the Sacred Heart, and as always, God bless.